I don't want to do this. I really don't. When Mike Zimmer got fired 2.5 years ago, my reaction to that was the last time that I went off on the guy. Since that time, I've barely uttered his name. When I have, the few times I have, it's been in a very respectful, matter-of-fact tone. No sort of aggressiveness whatsoever, as this video is brought to you by BetUS Sportsbook and Casino. I've moved on. We've all moved on. This is a new era of Vikings football. I don't want to talk about this. But this is a channel on YouTube that talks about the Minnesota Vikings. Anything involving, surrounding the Minnesota Vikings, I have to cover it. So here it goes. Zimmer recently spoke with Mark Craig of the Minnesota Star Tribune. That piece got released this morning, in which case Craig begins it by highlighting that Zimmer is finally happy again as defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys. Good for him. Zimmer then began to reflect on his time in Minnesota, starting with his firing, saying, quote, "They asked me," talking about the Wolf brothers, "if I wanted to address the team. And I said, hell no. They got me fired. I didn't know I was supposed to go to HR and sign out or whatever. No one told me. I just got all my stuff, got in my truck, and left. And I can tell you, I've not watched one Minnesota game since." That I don't blame him for. We've all been fired at some point in our lives, unless you're just a goody two-shoes over there. And once you get fired, the check stops. Hey, you want to hang out and talk to the group a little bit? No, I want to go home. Screw you guys. Don't blame him at all. It's very natural. Craig then brought up the quote by Eric Kendricks upon Zimmer's firing, in which case he said, "I don't think a fear-based organization is the way to go." Eric Kendricks is now with the Dallas Cowboys. And Kendricks has since had a redaction on that quote, saying, quote, "Zim and I talked about that quote before I signed here. Look, it was the climate of the time. Things weren't going well. Emotions, pressures were high. People say things and do things that are not to their true character. We both said things back then that we shouldn't have said in the heat of the moment." Kendricks, come on, bro. Stand on business. You said what you said, and I know you meant it. Because he left, and you felt the freedom to say that. And now that you're back with the Dallas Cowboys, hey, you know what? That was just heat of the moment. Come on, bro. But I get it. You're trying to get back in his good graces again now that you're on that team. That's wild. And we're going to get more in. There's so much to unpack here, but before we get into that, sign up for BetUS Sportsbook and Casino. Get a 125% bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. The latest bet that I'm a fan of is Jonathan Grenard this 2024 season, having over 8.5 sacks. Now getting back to Zimmer. He did admit that his tough guy approach, my way or the highway, led to him regretting at least a team meeting he had, in which case when the rumors were circling that he was possibly going to get fired, he defended his job and his performance to the players in an actual team meeting, talking about the adversity he had to overcome. Adrian Peterson's indictment, Teddy Bridgewater's knee breaking, and according to Craig, the speech left players dumbfounded, which is, all right, man, I get that it sucked, but you're acting like the Vikings are the only team in history to suffer catastrophic injuries or some sort of adversity off the football field to where, all right, this is not what you planned for, but all the other teams in the league, they go through it and then they adjust. But you're saying, look what I had to go through. Responded to Chris Boyd. Apparently, Boyd was talking smack on him. He said, Chris Boyd, he says something about me. I'm like, dude, you had more special team penalties than anyone I can remember. All right, I can respect that. And I talked about Eric Kendricks and how it was easy for him to stay silent while Zimmer was in the building. Once he left, he sang like a canary. You can't have a fear-based approach when it comes to coaching. Now that you're being coached by Zimmer again, hey, everything's good. I didn't mean that. It was the heat of the moment. You didn't stand on business. You know who did stand on business? Terrence Newman. Newman, who was an assistant coach at the time under Zimmer's leadership, described the atmosphere as toxic, his direct word. Zimmer responded to that saying, quote, "That one hurt me bad. Terrence was like my son. I called Parcells about that one. I called Terrence. He said, well, that's how I felt, standing on business. And I said, then look, we're done." Are you kidding me? You thought of him as your son? And him delivering to you how he felt at the time. How dare you speak against me? It's my way or the highway. You, everyone under me, assistant coaches, players, you're pawns in my master plan. He speaks against you, and instead of trying to have an actual conversation and working it out, someone you thought of as like a son to you, you just cut the relationship off? But not surprising, he bought out oh my gosh, there's so much to unpack here. He bought out Paul Allen's share of a racehorse that they co-owned together. This is Paul Allen we're talking about. Mr. Everything is okay. Sunshine and rainbows. Nothing to see here. Everything's great. The one time he delivered some sort of critique against you, it was Zimmer snapped due to the exchange that he had with Kirk Cousins on the sidelines. I forgot what game it was, when Kirk Cousins grabbed Zimmer by the shirt and was just like, "You like that?" It was after a really good play, and he said Zimmer snapped. He bought out Paul Allen's share of that racehorse. And then he admitted to that, hey, what do you want? I hold grudges. That's just who I am. Again, not surprising. He barely talked to Rick Spielman, the general manager. Barely talked to your boss, the guy above you. A GM and a head coach, they can't be in separate corners of the building, never talking to each other. You barely talk to him? In 2021, Spielman has texted Zimmer, according to Mark Craig, but Zimmer hasn't responded. And then we get to the 2021 draft. Okay. He said on that, quote, "I walk in before the draft and Rick is watching quarterback interviews from the combine. He hadn't told me anything. Normally, he always keeps me abreast of everything, and he and I were always good. That is until they weren't. Zimmer was in pre-draft meetings that discussed the quarterback class. He just didn't like the direction the draft took, considering the state of his defense at the time." So, and it's funny how this is all coming out. I said this years ago. It was so obvious as someone who wasn't in the locker room, but wasn't afraid to say this crap. He didn't care about quarterbacks. All he cared about was defense. Screw the quarterback position, even though that's something we clearly have to address. Let's just, hey, bro, come on, man. What do you want from me? We need defense. Which, oh my God, with your prehistoric, you know what, let me save that for later. Quote, "The first round, Rick tried to trade up for Justin Fields, who hasn't done anything." Well, he's right about that. Okay, fine. But he talked about Kellen Mond as well, and the controversial quote in which he said, "Listen, I see Kellen Mond every day. That's why I'm not going to play him." And he reacted to that saying, quote, People made a big deal out of me saying after that game I didn't need to see more of Mon. I saw him every day in practice. Maybe I was omniscient or something. He played 3 NFL snaps and 2 were bad. And he's right. Kellen Mond is a bad quarterback. However, Zim, quite frankly, I don't care about your quarterback analysis because on one hand, Kellen Mond is an awful quarterback. On the other, you had your head so far up Sean Mannion's ass, saying why he's so clearly better than Kyle Sloter. How? And not just you, select members of the media. How? How is he better? What does he do on the football field that's better than Kyle Sloter? This dude is ass, bro. And going back to the last video I did, talking about the release of Jaron Hall, he brings veteran leadership and experience. Well, I tell you what, man, we got a heavy dose of that when he stepped his ass on the field, right? When Kirk Cousins got COVID against the Packers, Lambeau Field, when he dropped the stank-ass, hot-ass deuce. What you say then? Talked about Kirk Cousins, complained that it took away resources from his defense. Quote, we're averaging 10 wins a year, playing really good defense with some other quarterbacks who weren't as talented as Kirk. Then we paid Kirk a lot of money and ended up having to get rid of some guys on defense and weren't able to get the ones we needed. So there's 2 things here to talk about. The first being, well, it took away stuff from our defense. That, again, that's all you cared about. So why not just be a defensive coordinator? You're the head coach, bro. You oversee all 53 players on that roster. And then you're like, we're averaging 10 wins a year. Who gives a damn? Who gives it, bro? You know what's so funny? You benefited from being the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, where it's Minnesota nice. If you had worked anywhere else, because A, the national media doesn't care about the Vikings, but if you had worked anywhere else, if you were the head coach with the same performance, you would have been fired years ago. But we're averaging 10 wins. Bro, screw the 10 wins. F the 10 wins. We're trying to get a championship. What happened to the team, Zim, in 2017 when you barely escaped the New Orleans Saints in the divisional round after blowing a 17-0 lead in the first half and did not have your team prepared in the NFC Championship game, 38-7? Don't talk to me about some damn 10 wins. We're trying to win chips here. The hell are we talking about? What happened in 2019? Oh, we beat the Saints. That's the thing with you. You knew you could get away with just doing the bare minimum. 10 wins. Hey, we barely beat the Saints. Twice. Minneapolis Miracle, and then overtime, Kyle Rudolph. What happened the following game, Zim, against the Niners? You weren't prepared. You bleeped the bed. Talked about that as there were rumors circling around saying he could possibly get fired, but he pulled off that miracle win in the wild card round at the Superdome. So I should be here forever because all I have to do is the bare minimum for a team that's so desperate to get a championship. You had no aspirations to be great. You didn't. You thought you could just coast on by. And I called for your job, bro. I called for your job. After that bum-ass performance in the NFC Championship game, I said, this is terrible. What are we doing here? But I didn't say anything about you. And then that following year, the conclusion of 2018, when you lost to the Bears, when half their roster, they were playing second string, third string, fourth string players. At the end of the year, you lost to that team, costing you a playoff spot. I said, bro, you should be fired. I was the only one saying that, bro. And everyone came after me. You don't know what you're talking about. Look what he's had to deal with. Everything I said turned out to be true. Amazing. The fact is, Mike Zimmer, as a head coach, I'm only talking about him as a head man. Mike Zimmer, as a head coach, was a disgrace. Mike Zimmer, as a head coach, was a child. Evidently, still a child. A 68-year-old child. You have no self-awareness. You're not able to hold yourself accountable. It's everybody else's fault for your shortcomings while you were here in Minnesota. That's crazy. I didn't even want to do this. You talked out the side of your ass again, which is sparking this whole discourse right now. Outside of Marvin Lewis, you're the biggest fraud of a head coach I've ever seen in my life. If you had been anywhere else, you would have been fired years ago. And people say, oh, well, you just do a YouTube channel. Clearly, they know more than you, right? You don't know anything. Why don't you be the GM? Man, if I was the GM, you would have been fired after 2018 and would have saved this franchise 3 more years of headache from you. You may not want to hear it from Terrence Newman. Eric Kendricks can sit there and pretend he didn't mean what he said after you got fired. But you're still the same guy. Which is why defensive coordinator, you want to focus on just the defense, be a defensive coordinator, which is what you are. He talked about the aspirations of maybe being a head coach again. Bro, any team that decides to hire this man as a head coach is fundamentally stupid. You're a fraud as a head coach. Eric Kendricks don't want to stand on business. Terrence Newman did. I'm going to do it as well. Respectfully. Shout out to the folks at BetUS Sportsbook and Casino. We'll see you next time.